بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We were mentioning that there are different levels within the broad category of Sahih narrations. So the first category, which is the highest level of Sahih narrations, is for those narrations that scholars graded as Asahul Asanid. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he presents three examples here, and we discussed the first example. So now we can inshallah go through the second example. He says, وَكَمُحَمَّدْ ibn Sirin عن عبيدة بن عمرو عن علي. That when Muhammad ibn Sirin narrates from Abida, who narrates from Ali radiyallahu anhum, then some scholars, they consider this to be Asahul Asanid. So regarding the scholars who claimed that this is Asahul Asanid, it is Sulaiman ibn Harb and Ali ibn al-Madini and Amr ibn Ali al-Fallas. Sulaiman ibn Harb, Ali ibn al-Madini and Amr ibn Ali al-Fallas. These three scholars, they claimed that this is Asahul Asanid. To quote it from one of them with a reference, Imam Hakim rahimahullah, he quotes with his chain, وأخبرني خلف بن محمد البخاري قال حدثنا محمد بن حريث البخاري قال سمعت عمرو بن علي يقول أصح الأسانيد محمد بن سيرين عن عبيدة عن علي. This is in معرفة علوم الحديث on page 99. There are other scholars who also agreed on the first two links of this chain. So they agree on the portion which consists of Abida narrating from Ali. However, they differ on the student of Abida. So these three scholars who we quoted, Sulaiman ibn Harb and Ali ibn al-Madini and Amr ibn Ali al-Fallas, they are fine with Muhammad ibn Sirin being the one who is narrating from Abida. However, other scholars, they feel that the other student of Abida, Ayyub as-Sakhtiyani, he should be narrating from Abida instead. So according to them, Asahul Asanid will be Ayyub as-Sakhtiyani narrating from Abida ibn Amr, who's narrating from Ali. Can you see? So it differs in the third link. And this is one view that is quoted from Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, and it's in contrast to what we mentioned and quoted from Imam Ahmad rahimahullah in the previous lesson. And from this also you can see that there is contradiction in the two views from one scholar. So from one scholar you have two different views that are mentioned, but only one view can be accepted, isn't it? Because Asahul Asanid means that the absolute and the most authentic of all chains. So it's in the superlative. There can only be one chain that comes into this category that's the most accepted. So each scholar can have one view. Only one chain can be considered as the most authentic. Nevertheless, looking at this example that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions here, let us go through the chain. So the first narrator in this chain is Muhammad ibn Sirin. Alama ibn Sa'ad rahimahullah, he said about him, وَكَانَ ثِقَةً مَأْمُونًا عَالِيًا رَفِيعًا فَقِيهًا إِمَامًا كَثِيرَ الْعِلْمِ وَرِعًا. So can you see that he mentions and he praises him for how great he was in the knowledge of Ḥadīth and also in the knowledge of fiqh, and what a great imam he was, how much knowledge he had, but together with his knowledge he also praised him for his piety. Now many of you know him for interpreting dreams. You know that there are also some books that are falsely attributed to Muhammad ibn Sirin regarding the interpretation of dreams. So everybody knows him regarding the interpreting of dreams. But when you go through the books of Rijal and narrators of Ḥadīth, then you find that he was an expert in Ḥadīth, and he was also known for his immaculate character. So he narrates from Abida ibn Amr. Abida ibn Amr, he was a Mukhadram. So what's the meaning of Mukhadram? There is a whole chapter that will come about this term later on. Inshallah, we'll discuss it there in detail. For now, just know that it refers to a Muslim in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam who did not meet the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If a person was a Muslim in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he met the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then he is a Sahabi. And if he was a Muslim in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he accepted Islam whilst the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was still alive, but he did not meet the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then he will be considered as a Mukhadram. And in fact, this narrator Abida, he came to Medina Munawwara to meet the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he just missed meeting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. By the time he reached Medina, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away. Nevertheless, he was an illustrious person from Khairul Qurun. In knowledge, he was so strong that a great person like Shuraih, and you know Shuraih, he was the leading judge, and there is so much quoted regarding his judgments, etc. Yet he consulted with Abida when he experienced any difficulty. وَكَانَ شُرَيْحْ إِذَا أُشْكِلَ عَلَيْهِ شَيْءٌ يَسْأَلُهُ. And then Abida is the one narrating from Ali radiyallahu anhu. So as for Ali radiyallahu anhu, once again we do not have to mention anything about him because he was a Sahabi. Plus his greatness is well known. He was from the Sabiqun al-Awwalun, from the Ashara Mubashara, the fourth Khalif of Islam. Many scholars brought entire chapters on the virtues of Ali radiyallahu anhu. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, he mentioned in the heading Babu Manaqib Ali ibn Abi Talib al-Qurashi al-Hashimi Abi al-Hasan radiyallahu anhu وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لعلي أنت مني وأنا منك وقال عمر توفي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو عنه راض. Now just to show you that even though Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is placing all this in one level, scholars create different levels even in this absolute highest category. So even if a chain has been graded as Asahul Asanid, then too some of these chains are greater than others. It becomes like, you know, first position and then second position and then third position. If you have a class of 10,000 students, or yeah, in this case you can say even 100,000 students, and someone takes the first position or second position or even the 10th position, then it's definitely a great accomplishment. So some scholars, they gave preference to these statements of the earlier scholars. They did not group them like how Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is grouping all of them to be on par with one another. So concerning this particular chain, after quoting a narration with this chain, when Muhammad ibn Sirin is narrating from Abida, Alama Dhahabi rahimahullah, he quoted that Alama ibn Salah rahimahullah said, Ruwina an Amr ibn Ali al-Fallas annahu qal asahul asanid ibn Sirin an Abida an Ali. This is in Siyar Alam al-Nubala in volume 4 on page 41. After quoting this here, Alama Dhahabi rahimahullah then said, قلت لا تفوق لهذا الإسناد مع قوته على إبراهيم عن علقمة عن عبد الله. That this, in spite, we do not deny that it is an extremely great and exalted chain, but it cannot get merit over the next chain that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is transmitting here, where you have Ibrahim who is narrating from Alqama, who is narrating from Abdullah. ولا على الزهري عن سالم عن أبيه. Likewise, it cannot come close to them first chain that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned here. ثم إن هذين الإسنادين روي بهما أحاديث جمة في الصحة. These two chains, Ibrahim an Alqama an Abdullah and Az-Zuhri an Salim an Abihi, there are so many narrations transmitted with these chains in the authentic books of Hadith. وَلَيْسَ كَذَلِكَ الْأَوَّلِ. But regarding this chain, where you have Ibn Sirin narrating from Abida, narrating from Ali, he says that فَمَا فِي الصَّحِيحَيْن لَعَبِيدَةَ بْنِ عَلِيٍّ سِوَى حَدِيث وَاحِدٍ. Nevertheless, this here is the opinion of Sulaiman ibn Harb and Amr ibn Ali al-Fallas and Ali ibn al-Madini. There is also another view mentioned from Ali ibn al-Madini rahimahullah. Alama Khatib rahimahullah, he quotes that one day Ali ibn al-Madini rahimahullah, he told his students, تعالوا حتى نذكر إسناد, that come, let us discuss about asanid. may يذكر إسنادا من اليوم إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لم يختلف فيه. Who can quote for us a sanad from us, that means in the time of Ali ibn al-Madini, from his time until the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there is no differences of opinion regarding that. So his students told him, Anta an Sufyan an Zuhri, that when you narrating from Sufyan from Zuhri. So he said, La ana wala Sufyan wala Zuhri. No, that's incorrect. It's not from me. Not the name of Sufyan also does not feature in it, and the name of Imam Zuhri rahimahullah does not also come in that chain. So then the student said, Faman laysa nadri. So here there's a whole discussion. Can you say laysa nadri or lasna nadri? Nevertheless, laysa nadri is also correct. They knew Arabic well. So then he said, Walakinni adri, but I know well. Hamad ibn Zayd an Ayyub an Muhammad an Abi Hurairah. So this again shows how from one scholar there are different views that are quoted. So this here is the second view, the second example that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimullah is given. Then the third view and example that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimullah presents is that of Yahya ibn Ma'in. وكإبراهيم النخعي عن علقمة عن ابن مسعود. So Mullah Ali Qari rahimullah, he mentions وهذا قول النسائي ويحيى بن معين, that this is the view of Imam Nasai rahimahullah and Yahya ibn Ma'in, when Ibrahim Nakhai is narrating from Alqama, who is narrating from Ibn Mas'ud. So this is only one view of Imam Nasai rahimahullah, and this here is also the view of Ulama Ijli rahimahullah. Regarding Yahya ibn Ma'in, this is also only one view of his, like how Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah mentions, but Yahya ibn Ma'in, he specifies an additional link. So that means although Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions 3 names in the sanad, Yahya ibn Ma'in, he added a 4th link, and he stipulated that it must be that A'mash an Ibrahim an Alqama an Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. That is the most authentic chain. So Yahya ibn Ma'in, he specifies the student of Ibrahim an-Nakhai, A'mash, in this chain. And this is one view of Yahya ibn Ma'in. There are other views which are also transmitted from him. Likewise, a few other scholars too, they regarded this chain as the most authentic, but they also added additional links. For example, Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak rahimahullah, he also had lots of regard for this chain, although he does not clearly say that it is the most authentic. I'll quote his words shortly inshallah, but he done 2 things. So Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, he firstly extends the chain, but the person is different from who Yahya ibn Ma'in said. So he replaces A'mash with Mansur, that it must be Mansur who is narrating from Ibrahim. That's the first thing that he done. And the second thing that he done is he extended this with even another link. So that means that there must be 2 additional links from what Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned. So Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak rahimahullah, he said that it must be a chain where Sufyan is quoting from Mansur, and then you have this chain that is mentioned here in Nuzha an-Naḍar. So you can see in this way he specified it further. Alama Khatiba rahimahullah, he quoted that Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak said, Ma ajma'a an-nasu ala shay'in ijma'uhum ala hadha al-isnad. Sufyan an Mansur an Ibrahim an Alqamah an Abdullah. That people have not been unanimous like how they are unanimous on this particular chain, where you have Sufyan narrating from Mansur, who's narrating from Ibrahim, who's narrating from Alqamah, who's narrating from Abdullah. And this shows you that there were many scholars who considered this here to be the most authentic of all chains. And these scholars are mostly from Iraq and from Kufa. Then like we said, there are also other views quoted from Yahya ibn Ma'in. So for example, Alama Khatiba rahimahullah narrated that Yahya ibn Ma'in said, so the student Yahya ibn Ahmad, he asked Yahya ibn Ma'in that al-ifrad ahabbu ilayka aw at-tamattu' aw al-qiran, that from the 3 types of Hajj, which is the best? So Yahya ibn Ma'in responded and said al-ifrad. Then was ذكر إسناد عبد الرحمن ibn al-Qasim عن أبيه عن عائشة. Then he quoted the sanad here, where you have Abdul Rahman, the son of Qasim, who's narrating from his father, who's quoting from Aisha radiyallahu anha. And then he said, ليس إسناد أثبت من هذا. There is no chain that is stronger than this. So let us go through the names that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned. The first name is Ibrahim an-Nakh'i. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he said about him, كان إبراهيم ذكيا حافظا. This here is in Siyar Alam al-Nubala in volume 4 on page 529. That Ibrahim was extremely intelligent and he was a Hafiz. The important thing to note here is that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he also was a Hafiz. And he is mentioning this here. So he is acknowledging that in spite of being a Hafiz, he is acknowledging that Ibrahim an-Nakh'i was also a Hafiz. And this here is one thing to always keep in mind when you go through the books of Rijal, that one is the praise and one is to see who the praise is coming from. Alama Dhahabi rahimahullah, he describes him as Al-Imam al-Hafiz Faqih al-Iraq. Just as an additional fa'idah, despite being so knowledgeable, Haji Khalifa, he states concerning him, كان إبراهيم النخعي رجلا زاهدا لا يدرى هو من الفقراء أو من القراء. So this here is mentioned in Sulam al-Wusul ila Tabaqat al-Fuhul in volume 1 on page 66. So Ibrahim Nakh'i, he is quoting from Alqamah ibn Qais al-Laythi. He was the uncle of Ibrahim Nakh'i. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he also included him in the list of the most senior and the best tabi'in. He said, أفضل التابعين قيس وأبو عثمان وعلقمة. So you can see he takes the name of Alqamah ومسروق. هؤلاء كانوا فاضلين ومن علية التابعين. علما ذهبي rahimahullah, he referred to him as فقيه الكوفة وعالمها ومقرئها الإمام الحافظ المجود المجتهد الكبير. You can see he's a very great tabi'i. Ibn Hibban rahimahullah, he mentioned in his Tiqat, and likewise Ibn Manjuya, he mentioned in Rijal Sahih Muslim, وَكَانَ رَاهِبَ أَهْلِ الْكُوفَةِ عِبَادَةً وَعِلْمًا وَفَضْلًا وَفِقْهًا وَكَانَ مِنْ أَشْبَهِهِمْ بِعَبْدُلlah ibn Mas'ud هَدْيًا وَدَلًّا. I'm going to come back to this point inshallah. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, again, he was a Sahabi, and therefore we do not have to prove his greatness. So this point here, which I mentioned, that وَكَانَ مِنْ أَشْبَهِهِمْ بِعَبْدُلlah ibn Mas'ud هَدْيًا وَدَلًّا. So this is the point which I want to show, especially since Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he gives a lot of consideration to this chain and to these narrators. So they mention one unique thing about this whole chain. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, he would follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in every possible way. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, he quotes with his chain to Abdurrahman ibn Yazid that he said, سألنا حذيفة عن رجل قريب السمت والهدي من النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم حتى نأخذ عنه. That we asked Hudhayfa radiyallahu anhu about a person who resembled the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and followed him and emulated him in every way. حتى نأخذ عنه. Can you see that they were looking for someone who practices upon the sunnah so that they could also practice upon the sunnah. In today's times, when we want to know which scholars we should follow, we should look at those who also fulfill this clause and they fulfill this condition of following the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Hudhayfa radiyallahu anhu, he responded and he said, ما أعرف أحدا أقرب سمتا وهديا ودلا بالنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من ابن أم عبد. I don't know of anyone who follows the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم more than Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, he followed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to such an extent, and he kept such a close contact with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that outsiders, when they would come to Medina, they would assume that he is from the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Again, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah narrates this. He quotes his chain to Abu Musa Ash'ari radiyallahu anhu. He says, قدمت أنا وأخي من اليمن, that myself and my brother, we came from Yemen. فمكثنا حينا ما نرى إلا أن عبد الله بن مسعود رجل من أهل بيت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لما نرى من دخوله ودخول أمه على النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. For a long while we stayed in Medina, and we would think that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is from the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? Because he would come so frequently to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself and his mother. So often they would come, and they would come so casually to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Therefore, we assume that they were from the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he was a replica of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The next narrator, Alqamah, he became a replica of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. We just quoted now, isn't it? Allama Khatib, rahimahullah, he quotes his son to Ibrahim an-Nakha'i that he said, Kana Alqamah yushbihu bi Abdullah. That Alqamah would resemble Abdullah. In Tasawwuf, they have this, where the murid, he follows the Shaykh to such an extent that he even starts to look like the Shaykh. So there's a whole discussion about that, but nevertheless, Alqamah, he even began to resemble Abdullah. And Allama Khatib, rahimahullah, he also quotes from Abu Mansur that كنا عند عمرو بن شرحبيل قال انطلقوا بنا إلى أشبه الناس هديا ودلا وأمرا بعبد الله بن مسعود. That he said, let us go to that person who follows Abdullah ibn Mas'ud the most, and he actually even resembles Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. فقمنا معه ما ندري أين يريد حتى دخل بنا على Alqamah. We stood and we went with him. We didn't know who is going to, who is this person that resembles Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. We followed him حتى دخل بنا على Alqamah, until we reached the house of Alqamah. So Alqamah, he followed and he resembled Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Ibrahim an-Nakha'i, rahimahullah, he then followed Alqamah in everything. Allama Khatib, rahimahullah, he quotes, كان يقال ما رأينا رجلا قط أشبه هديا بعلقمة من النخع. That we don't know of anyone who followed Alqamah the most than Ibrahim an-Nakha'i. And then Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, he followed Ibrahim an-Nakha'i the most, and then Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, he followed Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman in everything. So what does this mean? So you can work it out what it means. That every person is following the person above him. It will ultimately mean that Imam Abu Hanifa followed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam the most. Nevertheless, these are three examples that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah presented for Asahul Asanid, and he placed them in the highest category of authentic narrations. Besides these, there are many other views as well. Allama Khatib, rahimahullah, he has gathered many chains in Al-Kifaya. He brought the chapter ذكر المحفوظ عن أئمة أصحاب الحديث في أصح الأسانيد. And under this chapter, he brought numerous quotations and opinions of leading scholars on what they regarded as the most authentic of all chains. So if you're interested, then you can refer to Al-Kifaya. It's between page 397 to page 399. There is an incident quoted where scholars also discuss between themselves what each of them regarded to be the most authentic of all chains. So Alama ibn Asakir, rahimahullah, he quotes with his sanad to Hajjaj ibn Sha'ir that he said, Alama Imam Hakim, rahimahullah, he also quotes it, but this time we're quoting from Ibn Asakir so that you can become acquainted with these different books. It's in Tariq Dimashq in volume 20 on page 59. He says, اجتمع أحمد بن حنبل ويحيى بن معين وعلي بن المديني في جماعة معهم اجتمعوا فتذاكروا أجود الأسانيد الجياد. These great scholars, they all gathered and they were now discussing which is the strongest of all narrations. فقال رجل منهم أجود الأسانيد شعبة عن قتادة عن سعيد بن المسيب عن عامر أخي أم سلمة عن أم سلمة. That was one opinion which was mentioned. And then Ali ibn al-Madini, he said, no, it's Ibn Aoun from Muhammad, from Abidah, from Ali. That's what we discussed. Then Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah, he said, no, it's the first chain that Ibn Hajar mentioned here, Az-Zuhri an Salimin and Abihim. Imam Yahya, he said, no, it's A'mash from Ibrahim, from Alqamah, from Abdullah. So then someone said that A'mash mislu Zuhri. Do you actually think that A'mash is on par with Imam Zuhri, rahimahullah? So Yahya ibn Ma'in, who was a scholar who knew about narrators, he said, بَرِئْتُ مِنَ الْأَعْمَشِ أَن يَكُونَ مِثْلَ الزُّهْرِ. Leave alone being on par with Imam Zuhri, I feel that Amash is even greater than Imam Zuhri rahmallah. And then he gave reasons on why he felt that Amash gets preference over Imam Zuhri rahimahullah. So like these, there are lots of scholars who expressed opinions on what they felt was the most authentic of all chains. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he expressed his desire that someone should gather all of these chains. So Allama Suyuti rahmallah, he quotes in Tadrib al-Rawi, وَلَوْ قَدَرَ أَن يَتَفَرَّغَ عَارِفٌ لِجَمْعِ الْأَحَادِيثِ الْوَارِدَةِ بِجَمِيعِ التَّرَاجِمِ الْمَذْكُورَةِ مِنْ غَيْرِ تَقْيِيدٍ بِكِتَابٍ ويضم إليها التراجم المزيدة عليه لجاء كتابا حافلا حاويا لأصح الصحيح. If someone has the ability of going through all different books and making an in-depth research and gathering all of these, it will become a nice good book, and it will incorporate all those narrations which are asahhu sahih, the most authentic. Only recently some scholars have tried to fulfill this desire of Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah. For example, Rabi' ibn Muhammad, he gathered a few, and his paper is on the internet, Al-Qawl al-Mufid fi Asahih al-Asanid. So inshallah we'll get the link also posted in the notes. Likewise, the Rihab Rif'a, he also wrote a more detailed book, and that book is also available on the internet for free. So we will inshallah put a link for it. Now, taking note of the various views, Imam Hakim rahimahullah, he suggested that it is best to rather restrict the term to a specific sahabi. So instead of saying asahul asanid mutlaqan, because now it means in the whole world this becomes the most authentic, and that's very difficult because like we mentioned in the previous lesson, that scholars did not know each and every narration that each and every narrator has quoted. So therefore, to put it in this broad way will become extremely difficult, and it's bound to error. So therefore, he suggested that we should rather shortlist it, and then it becomes easier to choose what was the most authentic sanad from that particular person. So he says, فَأَقُولُ وَبِاللَّهِ التَّوْفِيقِ إِنَّ هَؤُلَاءِ الْأَئِمَّةَ الْحُفَّاظِ قَدْ ذَكَرَ كل ما أدى إليه اجتهاده في أصح الأسانيد. All of these great scholars, they mentioned what their ijtihad led them to believe is the most authentic of all asanid. ولكل صحابي رواة من التابعين. But now let's look at the reality. Every sahabi has multiple narrators from the tabi'in. ولهم أتباع وأكثرهم ثقات. Then these tabi'in, they have their students. Majority of them being from Khairul Quran, they are all reliable. فلا يمكن أن يقطع الحكم في أصح الأسانيد لصحابي واحد. He's saying therefore it becomes very difficult to be absolutely sure which is the most authentic from just one sahabi. So then he says فنقول وبالله التوفيق إن أصح أسانيد أهل البيت. Rather we look now, okay, from the Ahlul Bayt, which is the most authentic asanid? So it will be Ja'far ibn Muhammad عن أبيه عن جده عن علي إذا كان الراوي عن جعفر ثقة, on this condition that the rawi, the narrator from Ja'far, is reliable. Then we specify it from Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu. وأصح أسانيد الصديق إسماعيل بن أبي خالد عن قيس بن أبي حازم عن أبي بكر. وأصح أسانيد عمر الزهري عن سالم عن أبيه عن جدك. So can you see what he's doing? وأصح أسانيد المكثرين من الصحابة لأبي هريرة الزهري عن سعيد بن المسيب عن أبي هريرة. That you have those Sahaba who narrated a lot. So let's see that, okay, Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, he narrated the most. Which is the most authentic sanad that leads to Abu Hurairah? So can you see how we are shortlisting it and how we are curtailing it? Instead of saying that it is asahul asanid mutlaqan, we're saying that, okay, from Abu Hurairah, this is the most authentic sanad. Wali Abdullah ibn Umar, Malik, an Nafi'in, عن ابن عمر بن الخطاب. ولعائشة عبيد الله بن عمر عن القاسم بن محمد عن عائشة. So like this here, and then he quotes from Yahya ibn Ma'in that he said that when you get Ubaydullah ibn Umar who's narrating from Qasim, narrating from Aisha, then this here is tarjumatun mushabbakatum bidhab. It's like tarjuma, it's embedded in gold. So that's how valuable it is. So this is how Imam Hakim rahimahullah suggests that instead of saying mutlaqan that this is the most authentic, rather we group it like this here. Nevertheless, all of these form the highest level of authentic narrations. Now, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he discussed the second category, and this is narrations which are authentic, but no one has ever mentioned that these are the most authentic. Inshallah, we will discuss all of these in the next lesson. Jazakumullahu khairan. Subhanallah wa bihamdih. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Astaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.